Welcome to Reflections on Music and Nature, and thank you so much for listening. I'm incredibly excited to share my conversation today with one of my absolute favorite composers, Lei Liang, about his orchestral work, A Thousand Mountains, A Million Streams, which was premiered and recorded by Boston Modern Orchestra Project and received the Grawemeyer Award for Composition. Be sure to check out their tremendous recording of this piece, which you can find basically anywhere that you get your music. It's worth your time. Liang is a Chinese-born American composer who has earned widespread recognition for his work. Awards include the Rome Prize, a Kusevitsky Commission, and a Pulitzer nomination, to name just a few. He teaches at several institutions across the United States and China, and his work draws on numerous influences, including his own Chinese heritage, Western avant-garde techniques, visual art, nature, of course, and perhaps most importantly, his collaborations with scientists. He is a Chancellor's Distinguished Professor at UC San Diego, where he teaches and collaborates with the Qualcomm Institute and the recently founded Lei Lab. This interview was a really special one for me because I first met Lei in my early 20s, where I was exposed to his music and his ideas about music for the first time. His way of thinking left a huge impact on me as an artist. His music is direct, eloquent, and yet highly sophisticated and original. He is a serious thinker about art and nature and holds himself to an incredibly high professional and artistic standard, never satisfied with an easy or an expedient path. At the same time, I think you'll find he's incredibly warm, generous, and easy to talk to. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did.
Great to see you, Ryan. It's been like 10 years since I last saw you at Davis. So
Yeah,
fantastic. It's good to connect again in Boston and then now on Zoom, of course. So thanks for having me.
absolutely. That's my pleasure, totally my pleasure. Um, so, I think before getting into the kind of the details about your piece, A Thousand Mountains, or A Million Streams, I'd like to ask about your own personal connection with nature, and with the natural world. Like, what is your own relationship with nature as a person, and then what does this word nature mean to you? It's a really big topic.
That is a big topic. Yeah, I'm sure we all have a lot of personal connections with the environment that we grew up with. When I think about nature, it's very interesting. It's the sound of nature that inspired me when I was a kid. You probably know that I started composing when I was 6, and a lot of these pieces are for piano, and they're still being played widely in China. Most of them are about natural animals, right? So all kinds of things that make sound, from birds to elephants to lions. These are the kind of things that I just responded to. And one piece that I wrote about my childhood, I alluded to my childhood in a string quartet called Five Seasons. It's for pipa and string quartet. I wrote a section about the cicada chorus because after leaving Beijing for so long, for so many years, the sound of summertime is all about the cicadas. I miss that. In San Diego, we don't really have that. So I wrote this whole movement about cicada, basically for my son. I want my son Albert to know what does it feel like to be in the summer, in the heat, and all these tall trees in Beijing, and there are, thousands and thousands of cicadas around you, and just to hear this chorus. Of course, our memory is playing an interesting game with us. Probably in the middle of it, I would have find them to be too too loud, too distracting, but
More
memory has this
nostalgic.
magical way of, yeah. But it filters out all of that unpleasant aspects, and I'm kind of yearning for that sound. And so yes, that was my earlier connection with the sounds that I relate to. I think the way we think about it is like, uh, what is it that we remember hearing? And uh, this question became a very important one for me now. Said, yes, we study about nature, and with all this amazing technology we have today, we have new understanding of what nature is going through, and yes, what nature is literally, the physical nature. But on the other hand, we have to make nature sing. We have to hear them, and we certainly can hear nature in a very, very different way. So this has been sort of like the linking uh, the pivot for me to kind of bring what has been interesting for me intellectually, and how I relate to that as an experience, right? Music, after all, is an experience. This is what I'm trying to discover for myself and put it in through the lens of a musical experience.
Right. That's amazing. Well, you talked about like the influence of nature in your life and on your music. How has your approach to this topic, that is of course explored by I always say, like, I think there are very few composers who have not dealt with nature in some way in their music. For some, and I think maybe you're an example of this, for you, I think it's a big part of a lot of your music. How has your approach to that topic, as it connects with music, how has that kind of evolved and changed, during your compositional career?
Yeah, well, I think, well, of course, this is like telling a story, and I hope I'm being
Sure.
accurate about my experience, right? So yes, there has been a lot of inspiration based on the oral impression I have from nature, from the examples I cited earlier, to some of the things I experienced when I was studying in Boston, 14 long years as a student in Boston. And what I remember of Boston, I wrote a piece called "A Trio." It's just evoking the sense of walking in a snowstorm at Freshpond in Cambridge. The sound of snowflakes hitting the branches. That is what I have received orally from the natural environment that went into my music. But I think what has happened with the kind of project I was doing, basically as a preparation for the piece you referenced earlier, 1,000 Mountains, a Million Streams, is that I wanted to discover whether there is a way for me to hear differently, discover what was not heard, but is embedded in nature. So one of the things that I was very passionate about finding is, how can we get away from the traditional way of thinking of things as a kind of oral impressions, but really kind of discover the potential of listening, listening and to hear things that was inaudible. For example, I want to be very specific about this, because we can all talk about this in poetic terms, philosophical terms, but I'm very interested in the innovative power of technology that can really give us specific examples of things that can help us listen to our environment in a different way. So one of the first things I tried was with our team. This is a very unusual team that I was able to assemble at Qualcomm Institute, where I was composing residence. Just these are amazing people, and they all kind of become close friends, even feeling like family members to me now. We started about 11 years ago. Basically, these are people who are mostly engineers, cultural heritage engineers, material scientists, data scientists, software developers. And one of the things I was interested in is whether we can capture analysis, spectrograph analysis of basically the materials on the landscape painting painted by this amazing Chinese painter I've been in love with for many years, Huang Binhong, right? He painted these paintings when he was blind, when he was 87 years old. But we could now capture the materials of that painting, and through a fluorescence analysis, we can have data points of every elemental peaks of these materials. And we can convert that. This is the part that I was very interested in, is to convert that into audio data. So we can literally listen to what that sound is like, right? So this gave me a new beginning. I felt that there is a way for science to come together with arts so that we can at least discover what listening can offer us now. Not only we can look at a painting, we can literally listen to the painting. So part of that piece that you were talking about, the orchestra piece, a big section of it is based on this kind of analysis. It offers us new materials to work with, the new harmonies and of course many other things I learned in that process. So I find that to be really, really exciting. Again, it's dealing with the materials And there is a way for us to create a new way of thinking and listening to that environment that was not possible before. So that I find to be particularly exciting for me.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. You mentioned like a spectral analysis of those paintings. And for me, like as a composer, like when I think about spectral analysis, we often think about, harmonic, like the spectral music, like, Grisey, Muride, like the like a analysis of a sound. But what you're talking about is like a visual area of a spectral analysis and then translating that into kind of acoustics, I guess.
That's right. It's all spectra, right? So visual
Sure, of course.
wavelengths, they're all spectra, from the audio part to the
Yeah,
visual part. But what I think is interesting is that you can somehow bring these two different realms together, the visual and the audio. So it's kind of like what the Webb's telescope is doing, right? It's like all these amazing
right.
data, or they're not visible to us, but bring it to the visible range so we can actually experience it. And this is something that I think, for me, it's just personally, what's interesting is that we're not applying a method to existing sound. We're actually making new sound with this set of data. And that is what's different from some of the composers you just referenced.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, there's so many. I mean, there's so many, one of the reasons that the piece, just listening to this piece, it's a great piece. Like the orchestration is so beautiful and the harmony. There's a dramatic arc to it. But at the same time, it's rich with all these different layers. Like this artist, Huang Binhong, who was, yeah, like as you said, blind, or he was sort of blind, went blind towards the end of his life. It reminds me of Beethoven, I think, the classic example, right? Of like this great artist who lost his most important sense, but still was able to create. So there's something really beautiful about that. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And if I may
yeah,
add, is that
please.
sometimes when we work with almost a kind of a disability or handicap, it forces us to be even more creative. So what I think happened to Huang Binhong is that when he became blind, it in some way liberated him. And there is a way to think about him as kind of projecting his inner visions. He was no longer trying to depict what he could see in nature. This became the inner landscapes instead of a replica of the natural environment, right? So it's a very powerful moment. And when I think about music, a lot of times it's this kind of handicap, what we perceive as handicap, a
Sure.
disability, that could actually become a really powerful condition for us to think of more creative solutions. And I think why I was interested in him, there are many levels of appreciating that. And this is one of those, is that he was able to open up his inner vision because of these conditions that was imposed on him. But we, in a way, can creatively impose the obstacle to ourselves in order to create those creative, find out those imaginative solutions. For example, we make ourselves face this condition that we cannot hear something. This is beyond our hearing range. So what can we do, right? Then we can project it through technology in this case, and be able to hear things that were not audible to us. And again, this came with that obstacle that we inherently have. But overcoming that obstacle gave us a new avenue for creativity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, maybe you've read, like, Gabriella Frank has written about this with Beethoven. Like she talks about like the deaf aesthetic of Beethoven and how that affected his music, and it makes a lot of sense. You
That's
have the
right.
movement called opening the inner eyes also, which makes me think of this thing you're talking about. And as you sort of have referenced, this piece, in addition to, I mean, it's an orchestra piece, so it involves all acoustic instruments, but there are all these different layers touching on different disciplines. So visual art, of course, and then you worked with scientists at Qualcomm, and there are all these, interdisciplinary work is a big part of what you do as an artist. So I'm this might be a weird question to ask, but I wonder, like, how would this piece be different if you did not have the opportunity to work with these different people across disciplines? Like, what would it look like? What would it sound like if you just sat down and wrote a piece, kind of like the, the old-fashioned way, I guess?
I love weird questions, and I think this is a great question. And I don't think it's so strange if we think about it that you got your PhD from University of California, Davis, right? And I studied at Harvard. All these places that we are part of a university when we are receiving our training. But what does that really mean, right? I've been asking myself this question. My experience has been sort of like what you're talking about, the Qualcomm Institute residency, is really a place where I kind of ask myself why we're making music in the university setting. And basically what I wanted to ask myself is fundamentally this: is this music possible without being coming from a university? University, of course, here means a Chinese word for university is 大学, literally means great learning. What is great learning? I was born in a conservatory, and I grew up in a conservatory. I got my conservatory training all the way through the end of my master's degree training, and I always wanted to go to a university setting because I feel like that is the place for great learning. But how do you explore that, right? So I now have this annual seminar with my students, and I wanted to give everyone a taste of the kind of challenge that I find myself to be in. I would invite oceanographers and geologists and engineers to come, co-teach the seminar, experience all this information together with the artists, and see how we can find our relevance in this conversation. If the music that we're talking about can be created without a deep integration with these different disciplines, then that music can be created in a conservatory. It doesn't have to come from a university. It doesn't have to, I don't mean to make this kind of like a perception of kind of a hierarchy or division. I'm just saying in the larger context of great learning, or the larger context of important dialogues we are now having, right? Either climate change or all these multidisciplinary things. I think it's no longer enough for my curiosity to explore things that is within the walls of a school of arts. For example, working, of course, composers work with musicians, performers, and maybe with visual artists, filmmakers, poets. Yes, that has been happening for many, many years. I don't think there's anything new about that. But this is time to work in a meaningful way with people outside of the arts and really show that arts have a place in this important conversation that we're having, facing the challenges that all of us are facing. So I basically asked myself and my students to think, just to evaluate our work, to say, is this work, when we talk about all those collaborations and interdisciplinary approach, all these are hot words, but the meaning is, can this work be done without that collaboration? It's certainly not enough for me to think of a piece that is just, having a title referencing climate change or whatever, but the music can be replaced by something else. That wouldn't be enough. So it's really about finding those very specific and innovative solutions to link these things together. And fortunately, I really feel that so many different disciplines now gravitate towards listening. This is a very interesting tendency. This is another reason why I find myself to be in the situation. It's like so many wonderful friends from the sciences would propose these ideas to me, knowing what I have done. These proposals come from engineers who study fires or atmospheric rivers, to drones, and of course oceanographers and geologists, because they all realize that listening is such a powerful tool for their understanding of the subject they're studying. So it's a very exciting time, I think, for people like us who have musical training and put that into really great use in a much larger context, what we call the real great learning, right?
Yeah, that's very well put. I totally agree. This thing about, just slapping a title on a piece that is climate change related. That's yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that because it's something I think about a lot too. Like what like did you really yeah, well, we don't have to get into it, but
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that too, and I feel, we can do better
exactly.
than that,
We
like
can do better.
we
We can think
can
harder.
do better.
Exactly, totally. Speaking of titles, your piece has a lot, it's a 35-minute piece, but it has these many, many different shorter movements with very evocative titles, actually. Um, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to just read those titles. And
Sure.
I think they will make sense to, from our conversation, I think even listeners who haven't heard this piece before, they will kind of understand what's happening, and then we can talk a little bit about it. So all the movements in order, there's about 15 of them. We have mountains in darkness and the piercing light. Mountains gradually draw closer. A song emerges. Flying clouds. Admonition, the breaking down of landscapes. Opening the inner eyes. Vibration and pulsations. Ethereal lights and distant mountains. Mountains breathing. Mountains in motion. Mountains take flight. The shredding of landscapes. Healing raindrops, part 1. Healing raindrops, part 2. Landscape's heartbeat returns. So just that information there, I think, says a lot about the arc and the narrative of the story. And in the score, these move like the music's flowing continuously, right? There aren't really pauses necessarily between each of those movements.
Right.
So I'm really curious about, your about the, how you think of those titles. Are they kind of meant to help the performers, and this, the recording that we have of this is from Boston Modern Orchestra Project, one of the, greatest sort of new music orchestras in the country, and they really put out just an amazing recording of this piece.
Yes, they did.
Um, and so those titles, are they kind of meant for the players? Would you prefer that they are displayed kind of as the music is going or read beforehand, or kind of like what does the audience need to know, I guess, coming into this piece? What would you like them to know if someone was listening to this for the first time? Or maybe nothing,
Well,
I don't know.
maybe everything. It's very hard to be able to just tell audience what they are about to experience or what they should experience, and perhaps it's the best not to tell them anything, right? So I I think it can serve in any ways that is helpful, including not mentioning anything to them. I did feel like it was helpful for me to include those subtitles for the players, because it gave them a sense of oral imagination. It also give them a sense of direction, what they're trying to accomplish as a community together, making something and envision something through sound. So that actually served a very practical purpose. But for me personally, they reflect the many different angles I look at this, that I have discovered. For example, there's this thing about mountain drawing closer, right? It really came from my again experience working with scientists, that when we were able to create this is a Chinese landscape painting that we're based on, and the landscape painting itself is one leaf out of an album of what they call album leaves, and itself is really not that large, slightly larger than the 11 by 17 page that we usually use for printing scores. But what we have the potential of doing with our team is to do a high resolution scanning of this image and divide it into over 1,600 images. And the details that we can capture is 1/10 of our hair. Is that kind of detail that that the technology allows us to do. And one of the things that I learned so much from that process is that we can now, through this process, learn to look at the painting in a completely new way. And music has to reflect that. One of the things that was interesting is to put ourselves on the virtual drone, right? Instead of the traditional way of looking at painting, especially looking at the original work, here we can project the painting, the 1,600 images stitched back together as one giant painting that is being projected onto a wall of monitors that are made of 32 large monitors altogether, controlled by 16 computers. Each pair of monitors is controlled by one computer, and 16 of these computers controlled by a supercomputer, and then allow us to drive with the ease of just, a joystick. You could actually go into the painting as if you're riding on a drone, right? And this is a experience that was not possible before. We could actually see things that were invisible, right? So a fiber instead of a rice paper becomes fully alive. And one of the things I learned is that many of these 1,600 images are a beautiful landscape painting in itself, right? So this is the experience I had. And how do you create that sense of being drawn into a painting? That itself, it's a orchestrational question. It's a very difficult thing to do when you have all these players on the concert stage, but somehow you have to take the audience with you, bring them into the painting. That was an interesting sensation I had never experienced before, even though I have, look at so many original Chinese paintings that are really, really important, historical significance. This way of looking at paintings open a new, that's like opening my eyes in a different way. So I want to open my ears in a similar way. So this is another thing, just another example. I don't think I have solved that problem, but I think it's one of those things that could be, one of those things that we all can think about. Just the fact that drone is kind of prevalent now. But what does it really mean to see the world and for us listen to the world through the perspective of drone? What does that mean? And it doesn't mean that you have to write a drone. It's that this whole perception of being able to manipulate an image and experience an image in a way that was not possible before. But how do we capture that through a sonic experience that calls into question the sense of distance, calls into the question of orientation and direction? All of these things are the kind of questions that we never really had to answer before. But this is why it's interesting for me.
Right. Well, I mean, this is answering a lot of questions for me, actually, now that I had where like the role of technology is very clear, which is that, you talk about listening and looking deeply, right? And like we want to just keep listening and listening more and more deeply. And the technology is something that can aid us to do that, right? Like sticking microphones down under the ocean, as you've done in some of your recent work, and using this technology to kind of blow up these paintings in a way that we would never be able to, literally wouldn't be possible to see otherwise. And it also explains for me, I think, I wanted to ask you about the orchestration too, because I really think you do capture that, like this feeling of, we at times we have like the full force of the orchestra, right? Where, it's overwhelming. And then, there are passages where you just have maybe 3 or 4 violins doing these tiniest little, little scratch tones, and it's, that sort of breath, it really feels, it's really powerful. So I gather, yeah, these decisions, this kind of deep listening aided by technology here, and kind of perception that informs orchestrational choices, I guess.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And perhaps what I have just told you about the totality of the painting, being experienced with a wall of monitors, 32 monitors, to see this gigantic amount of, the information is incredible. But at the same time, the same technology can actually fine tune your eyes to appreciate a fiber inside the rice paper, right? So it's both the global view and the microscopic view of the same thing. And
Right.
that kind of unites a much wider spectrum of what we call the visual experience, but we can do the same thing with our oral experience. You can think of the orchestra responding to the entire not only the painting and the message about, the collapse of nature, the shredding, what I call the shredding of nature and all of that, but also to go into that moment where you feel like you can just cherish that sensation of being able to appreciate a fragile fiber inside of the paper. But they're all part of the large continuum of this wide spectrum of experience. Yeah, they're all part of our experience of landscape.
And I think, yeah, that appreciation for the small and each moment, that's so important for us in our culture now. I'm wondering about the kind of responses that you've had about this piece from audiences and from your colleagues. The piece was recently done in New York City by Beatmop. I'm a little bit bitter they didn't decide to do it in Boston here, but that's another thing. But what has been the reaction, and how what has that been like? What have people said to you?
To be honest, I'm not really taking my attention too much about what people really think about that. I do care about how the performers respond to this. That's probably as far as my attention goes, and I love working with the orchestra players. I mean, BMOP is a very special group for me personally, because, when they were founded 25 years ago, I was still a student, at NEC. Wow. And I remember, and this is, a group of people who, many of them are kind of new music players who are like my seniors, and I would consult with them about writing for new music for their instruments, throughout the years. So I know this is basically an army of generals, and they would be able to deliver exactly what I would like to imagine. And of course, Jordan Hall is great. I only, thought of having this piece played in Jordan Hall, and I know the acoustic would support us. It was, just a great surprise that it was taken to Carnegie Hall. I've never even been inside of Carnegie Hall until that concert. So it really is a magical place. But this is all like extra stuff, like it's fantastic. Sure. And wonderful to be able to celebrate that moment with this incredible group of people, and Gil Rose, the conductor. But what I would say is that a great orchestra with, we're talking about not just an entity that this orchestra, it's the people who make that place, this group, really interesting and great, right? So these great players, if you work with them in the way that I did with BMO, I feel like they could improve my music because they understand it. You can feel the excitement. You can feel that they're trying to do something. They can always add something to that piece based on their understanding. So there are moments like that when I could hear that. And that is probably the most beautiful thing. My moment that I enjoyed the most was like in the dress rehearsal in Carnegie. I was the last one in the order of the dress rehearsal. So everyone else left. It's just me with the orchestra in that hall. And I was able to appreciate that piece while walking up and down the aisles and experience that piece from many different corners of that hall and that beautiful magical space, and hear this orchestra, each individual players talking to me, playing my music. And that definitely, I could feel their heart. I really heard them. And it's probably the most rewarding thing the composer can ask for.
That's amazing, yeah. How has the crisis of climate change kind of impacted the way you think about composition and about music over time? How has that?
Well, I do feel like, yes, it's our understanding this is the most important issue in our time, right? I do want to caution myself, though, and I do this for myself, for my team, and my students. Don't jump on the bandwagon, don't, because there's a lot of opportunities for political expediency. Even people might profit from this kind of conversations. I don't want to be part of that. I think what we want to do is to do something concrete and take something that is harder to do. So what I think the pace and the kind of project that I prefer to take is very specific projects that are very challenging, and that would take a long time to discover and to fine tune and develop. So that's why we took so long. The preparation of that really was the reflection that took place when I was writing this orchestra piece, but also the project that took me to prepare that. That was several years of work, and that laid the larger foundation of how to reflect on this, not only culturally, but also spiritually, as well as just physically. What are we dealing with? So it calls into question, specific things about what is the material we're using, or what is the material we're inventing, and also what are the techniques that we're using? Not only technology, actually techniques that are innovative, and the idea about music, why music matters, what music can do in this important dialogue. So that has laid the foundation, kind of create the framework for our methodology. And now we have moved to oceanography, and that's taken us already 5 years, and we're just starting to see some results. And our team are now, in the last 3 years, been working on geology as well. And so this is all, developing very, very slowly, but I think it's very important work. For example, one of the latest things we're doing, there are 2 projects. One is called Inaudible Ocean, is to take all of this data that was recorded by the hydrophones, but we want to highlight what is inaudible to humans, but not only audible to the marine mammals that make these sounds, but also vital to their survival, right? So, from the clicking sound of the echolocation signals to their social calls and all these things. So we are trying to develop the projects that we can listen to, for example, Southern California, Baja California, the sound of the ocean that we are all missing just because humans are so limited in our hearing range. And the other thing that we are working on, I found it to be very, very exciting, is to take what we have developed earlier, the project of converting some of this data into audible, create this harmonies that we can actually hear. Now we have developed a prototype that will allow us to hear, let's say, 188 kinds of minerals, and each with this unique harmony. And we're still finding that tool. And if this is successful, then we can potentially hear thousands and thousands of these minerals, and recognize them through sounds. And these are all like really, really interesting tools. And imagine if you're given, 100 chords that all come out of minerals. And what do you do? How do you compose music? Not, using traditional, musical kind of techniques that you develop, but also create ways that would respond to what is the processes that made our Earth possible. From erosion to all of this, the pressure, the platonic, movements, all these things, those processes, how they can inform us a new way of thinking about musical form and textures and, experience. I think those are really, really interesting questions to ask. And so we're going to take some time, do it very, very slowly, because we're doing our part. Again, hopefully can contribute something to that larger environment. That's a great learning.
Right. So in other words, not trying to move too fast, which I think that's really important, and I have a huge respect for that. Like we're not just jumping on the bandwagon, but really being serious and taking the time to listen, because it's worth. I think it's worth the effort and it's worth the time that you put in.
Absolutely, yeah. Don't forget that I came from China, and for many years I wouldn't allow myself to use things that can be called labeling. Using Chinese folk songs or quoting. I avoided that for many, many years, and I also have been very I just feel like labeling is how do I call it? Maybe it's a badge of intellectual laziness.
Well, I could not agree with you more. I agree so much with that. And I feel, yeah, I just can't express how much I agree with that. It's,
That's
yeah,
what it
the same
is.
way.
So let's don't do that, you know. So I feel
Yeah,
like, okay, now climate change is a big label, and let's
it's a
try to
trend. It's trending.
make
Yeah,
sure, that's right. Yeah. Let's put some real work into it, and let's don't exploit it. Let's don't simplify our work by using that label. Let's sophisticate it. Let's be really innovative, but it takes a lot of time to actually learn how to do this.
yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Is there anything else you'd like to add or say before I let you go?
No, I just hope that more people would have this kind of, I don't know how to call it. It's not a privilege, but it's really an advantage to be in that larger environment. And someone like yourself in Boston, just imagine you're in this, the hub of all these amazing scientists working together. And how can we find ourselves um, a place on that table, for that kind of discussions. This is something that is to be explored. Is Nothing's being set up for this. You can go somewhere and say, okay, I'm going to apply for something that's for interdisciplinary project and stuff, but that's very superficial. What is really important is to develop that personal interaction with people who share the same passion, and you go somewhere where either you have a grant or not. It doesn't matter. This has to be done. So many of our teams, now I have a Lei Lab just launched last month, but this is really based on the kind of work that many of my wonderful collaborators and I have been doing for 10 years without this kind of attention and resource. We just had to do it because it's so much fun to do it. And we know it's a really good investment on our part because we are so eager to learn from each other. So many of us are in that kind of situation. It's just a matter of putting some time to cultivate those relationships. But I can guarantee you it's going to be really, really rewarding.
All right, well, thanks so much. It's been so great to talk with you, and so
Good.
really good to
Same
see
here.
you again. And
Great to
I'm
see
a
you,
huge
Brian.
fan of your music, as you know, and like I'm really excited to see what
Great.
you're.
Looking forward to your next piece. So best of luck. Okay.
Visual art, nature, of course, and but